we go. So what we're here to talk about is amends and how to rebuild trust. And we call this a three-step process. And one of the things that Dina and I were talking about some time ago when we began to talk about topics for this lecture series was this idea of how to rebuild trust, because in the context of our business day to day, this is a very, very common question that we get, and it's filled with misconceptions that we run into about how trust is supposed to be rebuilt. People wait for other people. They have unreasonable expectations of what the other person's supposed to do. They don't quite have an understanding of what their part in this is supposed to do. And so one of the things, even in 12-step groups, you know, we have this amend step that we've heard some ideas tossed around about how when you make amends, it's for you, it's not for the other person. And there's a thread of truth in that, but it misses a bigger picture. And when people rely on that, they miss the opportunity to rebuild the relationship. And without this skill, which can be taught, the relationship won't go deeper without some type of a rebuilt trust and with the amends. And you know, what we were talking about is this, Dina and I were talking about, is this a foundational skill or is it the cornerstone? And maybe it's a piece of language, but I want to say this is a cornerstone of a healthy relationship. It's not a foundation, because I know many people in many relationships who do not use this skill and can skate by without ever rebuilding the trust, and the relationship stays stagnant. So I think for a healthy relationship, it is a cornerstone and will help you turn the corner towards being more together, more connected, and moving to a place of deeper connection, which is what I think we're after. Shallow relationships simply can avoid this. They just pick up and sweep everything under the carpet, never revisit it, and they just move forward.
Daniel and I started playing around with this in terms of pulling together what we thought made the most sense for relationship repair. And there's a lot that's been written, and there's a lot written in the religious literature. The language is slightly different. There's often language about forgiveness. We have stayed away from that language because it means different things to different people. We also looked at the recovery model, the 12-step model, to see what it had to offer. And we looked at more of the old traditions of psychology, where early attachment was studied, and how there are ruptures in the relationship between infant and child and caregiver, and how that process gets repaired. So the language we're using is break, is rupture, repair, restoration. And we also will talk about commitment versus restitution, although some of you might be more comfortable with that language. So hold the language loosely, and we're going to try to convey our meaning without getting sidetracked on the actual language. So how does a relationship rupture? And there are many ways that this can happen. And one of the context in which this happens is between two people where there's some sort of explicit or implicit agreement that's been made. And this can happen between individuals, this can happen between countries, this can happen between siblings, friends, employers, in every area, in every level of relationship. The culture is so critical for the implicit agreements. And one of the examples that's just so typical that you all know is Americans hug. And when Americans travel around the world, they tend to walk up to people and hug them. And especially for Europeans and many other parts of the world, that's a very intrusive, offensive act. And for us in the US, it's, well, before COVID, it was pretty normal. And so that would be an example of an implicit agreement that is not stated, but is just understood that in this country we do this. Another that is kind of a funny one from travel is walking with women walking with open-toed shoes, which, you know, Americans walk around with open-toed shoes. Many parts of the world, showing your feet is very offensive. And that's a rupture in the relationship, and that could be felt as very offensive. So those kinds of things give you an idea of what the culture dictates, what tradition dictates, what the socioeconomic class dictates. And we're going to show you a video that we just want you to, you'll laugh because it's funny, but also just pay attention to how you would feel if you were in this situation. So this is in Japan. And this is a very typical everyday occurrence.
We were talking. Now watch the salute at the end, because they've helped out mankind and they've done their service. So they salute the engineer as he goes.
So if you're anything like the two of us, we would not have been able to tolerate that. Oh, I did it. Yeah. Okay, what does that mean? Let me get rid of that. Okay.
You want to get these out?
Yeah. So there are three ways. You want to do this? 3 avenues of relationship breaks.
The first is we talk about resentment and bitter indignation at being treated unfairly. And, you know, if you'll look, you know, these were the 3 things that we came up with as we looked at what the elements were of a relationship break. And this is the first one, is resentment. Second one is the shame. With that, there's a response and a disconnect. The response with shame is a disconnect when we feel shame, and we pull away to disconnect from the other, and there's withdrawal. A move to attack often happens with this as well.
So what we're saying here is that when somebody feels hurt by another person's action, if they go into resentment, and this is real or perceived, right? It's always real or perceived. They can begin to hang on to the anger without saying anything, hang on to it enough that it becomes resentment. And then the resentment itself creates the barrier and the break in the relationship. And the same thing for shame, real or perceived. If the person is starting to feel like something went wrong, it's all me, it's my fault, I'm bad, the shame itself becomes a break in the relationship. And I've said this on this lecture series before, that out of the 7 affective states of emotional affective states that we are all born with as humans, members of the human species, shame is the only one that actually breaks contact and that breaks connection with the other person. So if you're going into a shame response, you are in fact breaking the tie to the relationship. And then the last one is just if you feel hurt or you feel pain. If somebody trips you or if somebody steps on your toes, you may feel hurt and pain, and that feels like you've been offended.
So back up one, because I was going to tell the story. There we go.
Okay.
So we were trying to decide how best to walk through a scenario, and I came up with a story that's a true story that happened with me and my wife years ago. So I'm going to ask for a lot of grace from y'all a second time, not only about the technology, but there is some vulnerability on my part where I'm going to show up as less well-developed then as I would today in what happened in a true story that involved my sister, involved my daughter. So this story actually starts about 35 years ago when my father took me to buy a pair of boots out at James Leddy in Abilene, Texas. And it was a real bonding moment for us. Dad had used this guy to make boots for him. And so Dad took me out there to make a pair of boots for me. And I still have the boots. And so my daughter was a senior in high school, and she texted me from class one day. She was going to school at Plano West. And she texted me and said she had been voted president of Plano West FFA, and which is Future Farmers of America. And so I got to thinking about that event with my dad, and I texted her back and I said, hey, do you have any tests this afternoon? And she said, no. And I said, why don't we go out to Abilene and get the new FFA president a pair of custom made boots? And she said, that would be great. So I swung by the high school, picked it up, and we started driving to Abilene this day. And it's middle of the week. Now, one of the things that she said on the way was, she said, I thought Abilene was a lot closer than this. And, or she said, I thought Arlington was a lot closer than this. I said, no, honey, we're going to Abilene, which is about 3 hours away. So we got past that. And what happened is we went out there and she got fitted for the boots and picked out the leather and got her initials put on it and had them made just how she wanted to have them made. And we drove back. Now, it takes months, of course, to get these boots made, but she had little leather swatches of what the materials were made of. And we called her mom on the way back to town and asked if she wanted to meet. And so we met over at Cowboy Chicken, and we were sitting there eating dinner, and my daughter is telling her the story, and she is really happy about the fact that she is fixing to get a new pair of cowboy boots. And so what happened next is as we were finishing eating the chicken, my wife looks at her and says, honey, or she looks at me and she says, how much did the boots cost? And I had this terrible moment where I had to decide, was it better to lie in front of my daughter to my wife or tell the truth and face the repercussions of that? So I elected to go the honesty route, and I told her, I said it was $1,300. And to my wife's credit, she didn't say a thing. She kind of paused a little bit while she was eating. But we went ahead and finished, and my daughter was showing her the swatches and everything. And so it was, we kept with the festivity of the event. And boy, I really thought I'd skated through that, because back to Dina's point, there was some unwritten rules that had been called into play here. The next day, my wife and I were walking into Walmart, as it were. And as we were walking side by side through the parking lot, in that moment, you could tell she had remembered something important. And she stopped and she turned to me and she grabbed me by the arm and she said, do you want to tell me what's on your ever-loving mind to spend $1,300 on a pair of boots for our daughter? And she didn't say ever-loving mind. So that's the story that we're going to pick up with and walk through this process about the relationship break that I created buying boots for my daughter.
So we're going to start, this is sort of, it's a two-part process. So we're going to take you through the repair process from the offender's stance. So the person that actually was the inflicting some action and offending the other person. So that's what we're going to do first. And then second, we're going to go through the person that's been offended and what their process can be in order to create the repair. So step one is accountability. Accountability is the question, where did I go wrong? This is different than what did I do wrong? What did I do wrong limits you to asking just about your behavior. And what we're going to get to in this step is much, much deeper and broader than that. Accountability is where did I go wrong? So this step requires honesty, deep honesty. It requires self-reflection, and it requires a whole lot of courage.
in contrast is a simple apology saying, oh, I shouldn't have done that. And so what Dina and I really want to highlight is that this is a much deeper process and really takes quite a bit of effort to walk through and do this self-examination. So if we use my example about buying the boots, the first thing I have to look at is where did I go wrong? Is I look to a deeper place about what's going on with me and my daughter, and I want to feel special with my daughter. We chose to do it without mom. It's going to enhance, in my mind, the bonding that goes with my daughter and I. And there's the other piece of this is where I let my daughter sneak out of school. And so there's a specialness that goes with that. It endears my daughter to me. Frankly, it may cause an issue for her later on if this becomes a norm, but at that point, I'm willing to overlook that. The second thing that I wrote down was I knew the boot cost. I knew it was beyond the unspoken norm of what we did in my family about how much money we spent and how much money goes, what the money looks like in our relationship, in our marriage. And it begins to look like I'm hiding money in that way as I hide how much I'm spending on that. And frankly, I didn't want my wife's no, so I bypassed the entire opportunity for her to be a part of the process. I did not want to deny myself the connection that I would get with my daughter and subsequently with my father, because that's the echo of what's going on with this behavior. And so I did not want to deny myself. And so the last thing, which kind of is the deeper place that we talk about with this, is I was wrong when I stepped out of the relationship with my wife on this, because she has been completely excluded start to finish on this event where I'm trying to celebrate with my daughter. And I've chosen to put my daughter in this position of elevated status rather than inviting my wife to be a part of this or starting with my wife and moving forward with her in that way. And so you can tell, what I'd offer is that you can see, to do that level of work, to pull these strands apart like that, it takes a pretty stiff amount of self-reflection and a great deal of courage to really look at what it is that I've done and what my part in this is going to be.
And when we do this in therapy, we usually ask people to do writing, because this is such a difficult step in the repair process. People get the more tangible actions that they did that were wrong or damaging. So it's easy to say, well, I shouldn't have spent that much money, and then go to the person that they have harmed and say, I shouldn't have spent that much money, and I'm sorry, and I won't do it again. Right? That is really what goes on in our culture for the vast majority of relationships. Okay, I shouldn't have done that. I won't do it again. Sorry. Do you accept my apology? And people, will tie that up with all kinds of pretty bows and say, do you forgive me? I know I shouldn't have done that. Please forgive me. Do you accept my apology? Which is really a twist in what we're asking to do. This step is about digging deep into what were my motives? What was I wanting by stepping out of the relationship? What was I hoping to get by my actions? Not just what did I do wrong? So the self-reflection, honesty, and courage is huge. And my belief is that very few people can do this on their own.
Right.
That they really need another person to walk through it with. And when Daniel and I were doing it, he'd come up with, I did this, and then, I'd ask a question and he'd say, oh yeah, didn't think about that. So it was with that dialogue that you get the depth of what's going on. None of this says Daniel's a bad person. What this does do is get to some deeper desires. And those are always important for intimacy, to be able to share those. So again, if you have questions, you can write them in the chat or jot them down, and we will have Q&A at the end of this. So step 2 is still with the offender process, is what we call empathy building. The question here is, how did I bring harm to this relationship? So now we are asking you to step into the other person's shoes and say, what was that experience like for them? Using my imagination, what do I think that was like for him or for her? This step requires enormous vulnerability. Empathy always requires vulnerability. It's the ability and capacity to say, not only I hurt you, but I hurt you in this way. And that requires me being in touch with my woundedness, my ability to say, I know, because I've been there. I've had people go behind my back. I know what it's like to feel excluded. This also requires courage. And the last part, which is really critical, is the ability to communicate that I have a sense of how you feel.
One of the things that we run into regularly is there are folks who want to develop this ability, but they struggle with it, and they don't seem to have the ability to do this. And the good news is this is a teachable skill. And there are ways that you can work with somebody who has a good understanding of what empathy is, to walk through the process and build empathy. So that's one thing that I think is real critical to know, is that this step can be learned and it can be built upon and enhanced.
One of the things that I often hear in sessions, especially with couples where there's been trust breaking, is when when the person that feels offended is talking about how much they hurt, the other person's nodding and going, yeah, I know, I get it. Yeah, I really get it. And that's not what we're talking about. That's not communicating that you really understand how they feel. So we'll go into that in our example and give you some more examples of how to communicate it. Saying I get it isn't enough.
So where I went with this internal work as I'm trying to figure this out is, the question I'd ask myself is, how did I bring harm to the relationship? And the first one was out of this desire to feel special, both with my daughter, is I put my daughter in a superior favored position at the expense of my wife, and also put me into the role of good parent over my wife. And that's going to have an impact, of course, on her relationship, both with me and with her daughter. The second piece is this unwillingness on my part to be intimate with my wife. The whole idea of stepping outside of making these choices with daughters and making that decision to go to Abilene without any discussion with my wife, it completely cut her out. And that's the unwillingness to risk the no. That's the unwillingness to do anything other than what I want to do in that moment. And it's deceptive, and it's dishonest, and it breaks trust. And as I said, I did not want my wife's no, and that's about power and control. With that, I go one up with my wife. I seek that special attention from my daughter, and that's at both my daughter's expense and at my wife's expense. And there's a real sophisticated piece there, in that you can see clearly that I've gone one up to my wife, but I also went one up to my daughter, because I put her in that position of learning that she's special, or she doesn't have to go by the rules at school and so forth like that. And she'll end up paying a price for that later on. The first time she decides she doesn't have to modify her behavior to suit somebody else that has authority over her.
Or another byproduct of that is that in order to feel really connected to my father, I need to break rules, because he really loves that.
So finally,
she is a law-abiding citizen, so that wasn't the path she took.
And by coincidence, she's now a teacher, so she's dealing with all those other kids that have these issues. So I take some measure of pleasure in that. So I stepped out of the relationship with my wife, and the specialness that I was seeking with my daughter, that's supposed to come within the context of the relationship. Anytime I'm working with couples and they're asking, is this behavior a problem for the relationship? And I don't care if that's golf or the quilt club or anything, is the question I ask, is this energy that's better served within the marriage? And honestly, this energy would have been better served, this specialness would have been better served within the relationship as opposed with my wife, because that's how that's the foundation of the relationship is. And the other piece is that the deceptiveness and the distrust jumped in there, and that harms the relationship when there is no honesty that builds upon the future trust.
So the deception is, deception's one of these things that we can do at a level 1 harm or a level 100 harm, right? There are many ways that we're deceptive and dishonest. And what Daniel didn't do was let his wife know up front. By not doing that, by skipping that, then there's a greater chance that she will feel that this was done in secret, that this was done behind her back, that this was done with a dishonest and deceptive intent. So these are all the ripple effects of this seemingly, not too huge a break in the relationship. But as we get into it, you can see how many layers there are with this.
The last thing I'd say about this is inherent in this step is the ability to articulate it and to be able to step into articulating this with other people. And again, that is a skill that can be practiced and can be learned.
Okay. So finally, So the third step is compassion. This may not fit for you all, so we're going to try to explain it. We termed it compassion because compassion elicits action in us. And so the question here is, what am I committing to do going forward? What actions am I going to take to repair this relationship going forward? And this step requires a willingness to change behavior. At the very core, I'm willing to do things differently going forward. It requires commitment to stick with whatever it is that you say you're going to do. And these 3 steps combined are what we consider the process of relationship repair. So do you want to go through that part?
Yeah, so if we look at what am I committing to do going forward? If we were to talk, if I was to talk to my wife when I'm trying to mend this process after we've gone through and gotten a clear understanding of where I've gone with her and how I brought harm to the relationship, there's a statement I can make in the midst of that when I simply say, did I get that right? And it's giving the opportunity for the other person to be able to say, yeah, and add to it in that way. But when I get to this place to look at what's the commitment for the behavior change, I can say, I will commit to inviting my wife first whenever we're going to do something with the kids and get her involvement first. The idea there is to make sure that I'm honoring the relationship with my wife in that primary place. And that's something that I can do moving forward, is I'll talk to her first before I make plan with the kids. And, one of the things that I will say is it's real critical when we're talking about these behavior changes and what we're going to do moving forward, is it's critical that we show up and do what we're going to say at this place. And it may even be more intense. Well, it usually is more intense at the first, when we first start to do this. The idea that we didn't talk about the boot cost, I need to speak into what I know and discuss that. And so to be able to talk about the cost of things, and to Dina's point, it's not about that ignoring all of the facts. It's about that I need to speak into what is going on and talk into the boot cost before I do an event like that. Around the sneaking and the dishonesty and the deception, you know, that could very well be a therapeutic issue that I don't understand and can't quite get to on my own. And often that's something that I'll have to go to my therapist with. When I see levels of dishonesty in myself and in others, I'm not always quite sure I understand what the motive is. You know, my rational ability, of course,
Yeah, and
what I can rationalize
stick around, Chris.
hey,
Forever.
Can you all mute yourselves, please? I'm not able to for some reason. Sorry.
we're good. And so when we're dealing with that dishonesty and deception, I generally have to ask for help on that to be able to find out what it is that's going on and work through the deeper motivations. My brain I have the ability to rationalize. I've said that already.
And this is an easy part for you, for all of us to go into. So why did I sneak behind her back? It's very easy at this point to go to the rationalization of, well, that's because she always tries to control me with money. And that's because she went and spent this. So I don't think I have to ask her, and I can spend this, right? So it's real easy to go into a rationalizing that is really blame in disguise. So you have to watch for that. The other thing that's really critical at this point when you're saying, what are my motives? Is that the motives may be completely unrelated to that other person. The motives may be family of origin issues that you're not even aware of, that are subconscious or unconscious, and that this is just the way you roll when this exact scenario comes into place. And that's why Daniel said it's so important to ask for help. And it can be from a therapist, a friend, but you know, somebody who has some good awareness and insight and knows you.
And can call you on your stuff.
Yeah.
You know, and then the last thing is to maintain the importance of the relationship is the necessity or the desire and the willingness to put equal effort into putting exciting events into the relationship, where I'm not looking at going with the kids to do something fun and exciting like that. Look for connecting in special ways with my wife. That puts her back into that primary place in the relationship within the family of spouse, and we can connect at that level. And from there, we enjoy the kids. From there, we enjoy the rest of the family. But it is the primary place that the effort and emphasis is put for excitement, for enjoyment. It's the place that everything else builds from.
The word excitement we came to by me asking Daniel, what was so fun about that? And this is where you get into, you can go in two directions with that question. You can go into shame and shut down, or you can go into really owning what is your heart's desire. And what Daniel started laughing about when we were asking this was that there really is this kind of amping up the fun when it's done by breaking a rule or by secretness. Now, that's just not true for Daniel. That's true for a lot of us, right? This is that very childhood glee where we can get away with passing a note to a friend in school and the teacher didn't see. So it's important to look at that, because then when you commit to going forward, it's not, I'll go to the movies with you more often. That won't cut it. It's, I have to find things that will be exciting to do with you. And then the second part of it, when I said what was so fun about that, is because the experience with his daughter had such meaning. It wasn't just get boots. It was passed down the tradition another generation. So going forward, he's got to find meaningful things to do with his wife. So I hope that makes sense. It's sort of, you know, looking from the end to find out how to repair the relationship. I don't know if I said that well.
Yeah, no.
We'll come back to that.
Yeah.
Okay. Here we go. Okay, so now we're going to shift a moment and go into the process for the offended. I know. Did we miss that?
We're checking our slides here.
Yeah, sorry, just a minute. No, this is
Okay.
okay, so with the offended, so this would be Daniel's wife. She could experience that, and she could go into a healthy process where she felt hurt, pain, whatever she felt, and goes into an internal process of self-care, figuring out what she needs. We'll get into that in the next slide. Or she could go into unhealthy process, which involves blame. So this could be, I was wronged, you wronged me, and it's your fault. She could also go into self-pity, which says, you wronged me, poor me, screw you, I'm going to get you back. And that's a revenge response that people can go into. Another is the victim anger, which is resentment. And this would look like, this was done to me, so I'm going to hang on to this, and I'm going to use it and find ways to punish you. It's very much a, this is where passive aggressive behavior shows up, with withdrawing, withholding behaviors show up. So it feels often when people are in this reactive mode, they're acting quite punitively. Gottman, I'm sure most of you have heard of the Gottmans. They do a lot of research with couples, and he talks about the 4 horsemen. It's very easy when we feel like we've been wronged to go into hypercriticism, hyperdefensiveness, stonewalling, which is just a refusing to communicate at all or to collaborate and problem solve, and contempt. And contempt is the most destructive. Contempt is this feeling that someone is beneath us, that someone's not worthy, and that someone's actually deserving of scorn.
They're below us.
They're below us, yeah. So you can see that all of those, if you go into that as the offended, you have now actually stepped over and become the offender. So it's critical for you to do a self-check about what you're doing when you feel harm, when you feel wronged. And then finally, shame, as we talked about. If you go into shame, you will break from the relationship automatically. So instead, you could go into what we're talking about is a very healthier process, which is the process of number 1, do you want to do this? Identifying the pain.
You know, one of the things I just want to point out right now is if we go back to one of my earlier statements at the beginning of the presentation about walking up to somebody after they've been offended and saying, hey, I'm sorry, is that okay? And let's move forward. There's really quite a process here for both the offender side of this and the offended side of this. And as we talk about what the healthy self-care looks like, there are several steps here that go through this. First is to identify the pain of what happens. And if we're focused so much on the other, we can't take a break to do that. But if we stay in that observer position, if we stay in the what I call the functional adult or the authentic self, then we can begin to see what's really going on. And the next step that's most useful is, what do I need? And this is one of the most challenging questions we can ever ask a client, because everybody gets stumped on that. What I'll normally hear is, well, I need them to never do that again. And that's not what's going to take, that's not what's going to bring health or relief to the individual. It's really a deeper look into what would that give us if they never did that again. And we can kind of keep pressing the question of what would that give us? What would that give us? And we will get to that place where we begin to understand what it is that I want and need from this relationship. Next is share to be known. And this is an offering of intimacy. This is where we are trying to stay connected in the relationship and let the other person know what is going on with us. Because if we're truly going to be in an intimate relationship where there's an exchange of feelings, if there's going to be an exchange of thought, if there's going to be a connection that we have within the relationship, then I need to be able to articulate what's going on with me so that you have an idea of what's happening for me.
So an example of this is the talking boundary, that is so widely used now that many of you know what that is. When I heard you and then blank, you give data, my mind made up, and then you give the thought that came to you. And then about that thought, this is how I felt. So you are sharing what's going on inside of you to the other person without trying to control them, without trying to change them, and without trying to manage the outcome. You're just sharing to be known.
And finally, care for self. And that's, everybody has a recipe for health that we ignore at our own peril, but we have to figure out what we're going to have to do in the face of this offense, what's necessary to take care of myself in the midst of this.
And this is really tricky. Again, if you think back on any arguments or places that you felt wronged or harmed, the most natural place of caring, how do you care for yourself, is the response is get them to not do that anymore, and then I'll be fine, right? The focus gets so put on them about doing it differently so that I will be okay. And this is this is not what we're suggesting. This is about, how do you self-soothe no matter what's going on? How do you self-soothe? That's your responsibility. If you're giving the other person 100% responsibility for you feeling better, it's not going to happen.
And there they are.
And they're the infamous boots.
So that's at the fitting chair at James Letty's in Abilene, Texas. He has fit kings and queens, true story, presidents, governors, and Saudi Arabian princes and princesses. But that's the fitting chair you sit in. My daughter made those boots or had those boots made for her. They do have the initials in them. And my heart to this day gets warm when I look at them. So what we'd like to do now is to walk through and kind of put into play everything we've talked about and redo the conversation after the dinner time confession that the boots had cost $1,300. And so we'd like to just incorporate all of the stuff that we've talked about and move forward from that.
So we're going to role play how this could look once we get these steps down. So we're just going to put on here the prompts so that you can see them. So should we start at the dinner table?
Yeah, or the next day.
The next day.
My daughter's not there.
Okay, so if you remember, they're sitting at the dinner table. They've just ordered the boots, and his daughter is excitedly sharing about the boots, and she's holding up swatches and saying, these are the colors it's going to be. And Donna turns to Daniel and says, how much did you pay for those boots? And he says, $1,200, and then silence.
They were $1,300.
$1,300. And then there's silence.
So
and then the next day,
we'll pick this up from the next day.
Okay. So we're walking in the parking lot, and I say, what were you thinking?
Yeah.
What were you thinking spending $1,300 on boots for our daughter? And Daniel could stop at that point, right? He could get super defensive, or he could say, hey, I want to talk about this too. Let's go somewhere where we can talk, not standing in the parking lot. So that would be a respectful way to honor that this is an important subject. So this is not something you do on texting, by the way.
Or walking into Walmart.
Well,
some people do, but let's suggest that that's not the best place when you need a little bit of privacy.
Yeah, so let's say we go back in the car and sit there, and then I say to him, last night at dinner, when I heard you say, when I was listening to Marie so excitedly say that you called her, asked her to skip school, go with you to get boots, and then I asked you how much they were, and you said $1,300. My mind made up that was all done without me being a part of it. And when I thought that, I felt excluded. I felt unimportant. I felt like I wasn't valued in this family. And I really want to talk to you about that. There's some things that I really want to understand.
So you're right. And what I need to tell you is, since we had that dinner last night, I've really been doing a lot of thinking and some reflecting. And what I've come up with so far, this is kind of a fluid process for me, because I've realized there's some depth to this that I'm not sure I've put my finger on completely, but I want to share with you where I'm at so far. What I realized first is I went wrong in several places. The first one is I knew the boot cost was higher than what our norm is. I mean, we've never talked about stuff like that, but at the same time, we've never spent that kind of money without talking to each other. The second place is I recognize that I did not want your no around the money or about whether or not to go for the boots. And that's where I did step out of our relationship to connect with my daughter in this special way. So I do acknowledge that. Where I think I harmed the relationship is around this idea of specialness with the daughter. And what I imagine that would be like for you is that you would be very angry and very hurt about that. The other thing is, the other item that I mentioned is around the cost of the boots and my lack of honesty around that. That is, when I was thinking about that, what I just have to imagine that you would be very, very angry about that, with that level of dishonesty, and that you would be distrustful of me at this point, if I've done that behavior. And so with those things in mind, I wanted to check and see if I was getting a grasp of what was going on. That's what I've been able to figure out for me. And I can talk about what I'd like to do moving forward, but I do want to give you the opportunity to step in about what is your experience, because I certainly want you to know I'm trying to understand the impact I've had on you.
Well, you got a lot of that right, but I'm just trying to understand why you did it.
You know, that's one of the things I said. It was a complex thing, and I really meant that. One of the things I'm going to tell you is that I'm willing to do going forward is I'm going to take this to my therapy to figure out, because I'm not completely sure why I did some of this. There was this essence of trying to feel special with my daughter. You know, I've already mentioned to you about the fact that Dad did this with me as well, and continuing that tradition. But there's something going on where I was trying to connect with my daughter in a way that I think is more important for you and I to connect with. And so I'm not sure what's going on with that, but I am willing to take that to therapy. And I'll commit to this, that I'll keep you posted and touch base with you as I start to get some things figured out in that area.
That would be good, because I really want to know why you did that. That just doesn't make sense to me. The only way that I can make sense of that is that you did it because you prefer to spend time with her than me.
Well, and that's part of what I'm looking at, is to understand that piece of it. And, I don't think that's entirely true, that I want to spend more time with her than you, but there was an excitement that came about as it related to her. And what I see clearly is that connection with the boots with my dad, but there is something else going on, and that's what I want to work on.
So as I'm listening, and what is required at this step is a lot of self-regulation, right? This is the self-care part. This is where I'm soothing myself, I'm regulating myself as I'm listening, so that I can listen to understand rather than listen to point a finger or to blame.
It really, both sides of this discussion have to stay in our body. We can't go into a regression. The anger comes up too quick. The defensiveness, the shaming will come up on my side. And so to both be present and to go slow and to use respectful tone of voice, respectful words, and to really explore this as if we're both trying to get to the root of this. I think that's key to being successful in being able to do this.
And so I really am going to need to have some kind of new agreement around money, because I thought that our agreement was like at $500, and now you've spent 13. So I think going forward, I'd like to have it at like $300 before I feel like I can trust you.
Yeah, I got to say that was one of the things I was going to talk about how I was going to change my behavior, was having you and committing to having a discussion with you before I'd spend a certain amount of money. I'm not sure if 300 would be useful, but what I was going to propose is 1,000, is that we go at 750 or 1,000 on that, because just the way things cost these days.
So notice what's happening. Daniel went way over the agreed 500, right, to 13. So his problem solving says we need to raise the limit. That might make it a bit easier. That's absolutely legit. The 500 might be too low, but where I'm going is I've lost trust. So I need to go lower. I need to start at 300 until we've done this exchange a few times where I've seen him come forward and say, hey, this is 325. Are you okay with it? I want to check it out with you, before we can start raising that amount again.
So watch what could happen also, because Dina will come back and talk about that with me as we do the character. But it's going to be real easy for me to take offense and go, well, you know, that's just not reasonable to go with that. But if I'm sticking in this conversation with her, and we're both trying to get to the root of this and trying to find a way to move forward, and this is where the empathy is key. It's critical that I've got to recognize how wounded she may have felt, and to just be compassionate and say, yeah, I think that's got to be hard, or recognize that. If I truly have an empathy connection with her on this, then I'm truly going to understand when she says, no, I just have not, I don't have the trust, at which points it makes it far easier for me to say, you know what, if we need to do 300 or 350 now, let's talk about this in the future. But for now, I certainly understand, because I am trying to build back the trust, and I do want to be in a position where you do trust me. So I'm good with that. And then we figure that out, and then we may come back and discuss it again in 6 months or a year, or then probably in reality, what would happen is after 6 months or a year, and the next event comes up where my wife needs to spend more than that money, or I need to spend more than that money, and we come up and we can then renegotiate whether that's 300 or 500 or 700.
And then what about the, I don't want to feel excluded again. That feels really bad. And I'm just really not okay with that. So what are your thoughts about that?
Well, in thinking about that, what I realized is that I had done this in a way that excluded you completely as I was trying to connect with our daughter. So what I'm going to commit to doing moving forward is I'm going to always start with you, to start with an invitation for you to participate in what we're doing, and you're the person that I'm talking to about it. Now, if it's something with me and the kids that's typically to go fishing with one of them, which you don't typically do, then I can, but I'm going to touch base with you to let you know ahead of time. And if it's for an activity, then I'm going to invite you first, and then we'll make a decision together what we're going to do moving forward with the kids around the activity or the event.
That sounds really good, that you let me know first.
Yeah.
Okay.
It is my belief that this is where the energy needs to be, and this is where the relationship needs to be built. So I'm sorry I did that, and what I'm trying to work through this process to where I can rebuild that, and that is, I'm looking forward to doing that with you.
I'm really glad you said that. I really needed you to hear you say that.
As we've talked about this, I did want to check, is there anything that I've left out as we've talked about this, or anything more that you need from me?
No, I think that's it. I may think of more things tomorrow, or I may think of more things tonight. And if so, I'll want to talk to you again some more. Are you okay with that?
Sure. And one of the things I just want to say again is I am going to take this to therapy to talk about some of this stuff. And so I expect we will have some continued discussions, and feel free to bring it up before then if I don't come back to you with something before you have an awareness of something you want to talk about.
Okay. So that's a boundaried, healthy exchange that we think you can all shoot for. And the more you practice this, the better you get at it. We do want to take a moment to point out something that we have seen that is that can be really dramatic in throwing this whole process out. So what I have on the screen right now is the summary of steps 1 and 2, right? Which is the accountability, where did I go wrong? The empathy, how did I bring harm to this relationship? And then the next step is the step 3, which is compassion, which is what am I committing to do going forward? And this requires the willingness to change and commitment. So what happens between that empathy step and compassion? Daniel's saying, you know what, I really thought about this. I imagine you felt really invaluable, that you felt less important than our daughter, that you felt completely excluded by me. And now you've got a break in trust and you're wondering if you can trust me with money. And I'm going to, these are the ways that I have come up with to make that right. In that moment, what Daniel's doing is he is creating safety for this relationship. And in that moment, one of two things happens. I can rest into that and feel comfortable and feel at ease and then be more willing to have dialogue. Or I can get in touch with my feelings now that it's safe and I know he's listening, and I may have this huge eruption of more pain, more hurt. So this is where we witness couples getting derailed. It would be so easy for me to look at him and go, and you've done this before and you've done it 5 other times. And now that you're bringing this up, do you remember you did it here and here and here? And then I have this huge amount of feeling. What often happens to Daniel's character is they get really defensive and whoa, 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 we're just talking about this. And what are you talking about? That's not what we're doing here today. Or they get so into shame and their own pain that they step out of the relationship again, and they're unavailable to hear their partner's pain.
Which often drives the partner into further anger, because here we were talking about what's going on with me and how I can show up differently and show up, be in a healthy way for the relationship. And then when she starts to express her feelings with it, I retreat, and then it suddenly becomes about me and what she's doing to me.
So we have a video, all of this, we have a video from attachment research. Some of you know the video of the still face experiment. This is really the groundbreaking work of attachment breaks, attachment ruptures, relationship ruptures, and what is needed between the caregiver and the infant in order to reestablish trust and repair the relationship. But this portion of the video will demonstrate just what we're saying, and hopefully you'll have a better view of this concept so that you'll be prepared for it.
Professor of psychology at Tonic in University of Massachusetts developed a still face experiment between babies and their mothers. They had mothers playing with young babies. If the infant got really excited, the mother got really excited. Then they asked mothers to stop reacting to the babies for about 1 to 2 minutes to see what the babies would do. As soon as they start, the babies see something has changed. They know it right away. Babies try to elicit mother's response. They may start to fuss, even cry, when she is not responding. But eventually, they bring their hands up to their mouth to comfort themselves. The experiment is over. Now they can start playing a game. It doesn't take long for the baby and the mother to figure out ways to reconnect after the stress of the still face experiment. And that's really important for the infant. It means that the infant is able to trust this person to fix, to repair after something has gone wrong in the interaction.
So this is the most critical part of what we're talking about, right? This, in a nutshell, summarizes the importance of repair in establishing trust in a relationship. And what this points out is that mom comes back and is ready to engage, right? Daniel says, hey, I understand that was really rough for you, and this is what I'm going to do going forward. And as he begins that process of reconnecting with me, I am just spontaneously often releasing the pain of the disconnect.
Because the situation has been made safe for the person that's been offended. It's actually a marker of progress that the feelings are starting to come up with the person that's been offended. But if we're not ready for it, it's really hard to digest, and it's really hard to take, because we think we're just not prepared for it, or we become reactive or shame-filled, or whatever our go-to defense mechanism is in that.
So imagine if the mother had seen that reaction to her child, and this doesn't take a lot of imagination because some of you might have experienced it, and she shames the child and says, oh my gosh, what's wrong with you? I'm here now. What is your problem? Why are you crying now? With a stern, critical voice. That would create incredibly deep rupture, continued rupture. So it's the repair piece that we're talking about today. It's the repair piece that keeps us connected and maintains a depth in the relationship that doesn't exist if you can't walk through these steps. So I hope that was useful, helpful, and we are open for discussion, thoughts, questions.
Why don't we stop the share?
Okay.
And then we might be able to
So yeah.
get the chat, see if there's any questions there. And I'm going to put in, what I'll do is I'm going to go into the chat right now. There's a question in here I don't like very well.
That's great. You want me to read it?
Yeah, go ahead.
So the question is, was there also a discussion with your daughter about breaking school attendance rules?
And I can't type and talk at the same time.
So yes, that would absolutely be the second. And in fact, in our notes, we said there are two parts to this relationship break. One is with his wife, one is with his daughter. And yes, that would absolutely be a conversation that would be needed for that. And that would be around amping up the specialness by breaking a rule, and how that's not okay and not necessary, that we can have a connection without you breaking rules. That might be one way to have it.
Yeah. So other questions or comments, or if you need clarification on anything we've talked about here?
Feel free to unmute. You want to read it? Sorry, this is taking us a moment.
I've got these terrible glasses and I can't quite get the things in focus. It says, this good presentation. So originally you said the rupture could be resentment, shame, or hurt and pain. Which one was Daniel's rupture? I see his wife would have hurt and pain. And once I've been confronted with it, when I mean, everything's going fine for me until the very question came up at dinner about how much did the boots cost? And what I'll tell you, the shame was, what happened at that point. That was where I realized, oh my gosh, that's what just went on. And it was that was the I mean, it really just washed over me in that moment. And that's when I started to do all the mental stuff about what do I do at this point.
And it was shame, to answer Carla's question, right? I mean, specifically, he felt that experience of shame. And what he could have done with that is gone underground. He could have moved back and withdrawn and never circled back. And instead, he actually didn't initiate that. His wife did. But if she hadn't, you know, the question is, for those of you that realize you have done harm, is that it's on you to circle back. He was just lucky enough that she brought it up.
There's another question on here. Is this going to be available to watch again later? Yeah, what we do with the Zoom, these Zoom presentations is they do end up on our website for a period of time. It takes 2 or 3 days to get to process them, get them edited, to pull the dead air off the beginning of it, and then it should show up again. And also, if you'd like a copy of the, we can make that available
Facebook.
on our Facebook. We can make that a copy of the PowerPoint presentation available too. If you'd like that, just shoot us an email at info@d2counseling.com.
Yeah, but it also gets posted on our Facebook page.
That could be.
It does. It does. Yes. Thank goodness we have a technically savvy younger person who works with us, and she'll do that.
Other questions from y'all?
Where have you all struggled in this process?
Hey, I'm Natalie. Can I ask a question?
Yes.
First of all, Daniel, I listened to your podcast with Jody White.
Oh, yeah.
Journals of Bioethics, and I swear I'm totally in love with you. Not like that, but I'm just like, I cannot believe how you are telling my story. It has been mind blowing. Just my behavior, and it's like I've been sober for about 4 years, and I finally feel like I can do a real first step with powerlessness over this, because, you know, I haven't had a drink in over 4 years. It's not about the alcohol, it never was. But why am I not growing? Why am I so stuck? And why am I stuck in these behaviors? So I went to Al-Anon and did all these different things, and I had a bad experience in a breakup where I'm the avoidant, and everyone's wondering why I'm upset that he moved on with someone else. And I'm like, you obviously don't understand love addiction, people. But anyway, so it's been 2 years, and he finally made amends to me for bringing another woman to a meeting 2 weeks after we broke up. And nobody could understand why that was so much of a betrayal for me and all this kind of stuff. But he finally made amends after 2 years.
So,
And yeah, so go ahead.
Sure. Well, one thing I was going to say is, you know, we are talking to a group of people who have shown a vested interest in how to grow emotionally. That's anybody that you see on this screen right now. The world is not filled necessarily with people who want to grow emotionally, right? So let's not gauge our behavior off of how some other folks do, how they choose to live their lives. And honestly, you can't complete this process in a healthy way on both sides of this, because we don't have control of the other person. We said from the beginning that we were both vested, you know, both my wife and I are vested in having a healthy relationship. And so we get to work towards that. And, you know, it's not always as clean and pretty as it is when Dina and I act out these vignettes for the lecture series. But what I do want to offer is that we always get to continue looking at ourselves and to figure out what's going on our part. You know, the biggest piece of this work for me, as I said, even in the vignette, was I'm going to have to go someplace else to figure out what my motive is and why I showed up so seamlessly the way I did on this adventure about the boots. Do you have some thoughts, Dina?
I do, because what I'm thinking is what those 2 years were like, and if you were waiting for something from him. And that's why we divided this into two areas of working through. And if you do feel like you're the offended one, what do you need to do? And you don't have to rely on an amends coming back, right? This is that part of the lecture that we talked about. What did you do with it? What did you do with that sense of I've been wronged? Did you go into self-pity? Did you go into resentment and fuel that and obsess about it? Did you go into shame and say it was all me, it's all my fault? And all three of those are areas that you can work on your own. And that's the beauty of this, is it's wonderful if you have a willing partner, but it also gives you the freedom to get freedom by working through this process without having to rely on the other person. It's wonderful if we have another person that will step forward and do this, but we don't always have that. You all know that.
So another comment in the chat is, could you go through the offended unhealthy responses again? And I'm flipping back through the PowerPoint, and on the unhealthy was, it says the awareness I was wronged. And again, we can make available the PowerPoint for you. Awareness I was wronged, and that's when the anger just flushes. The self-pity, the victim anger or resentment, and then the 4 horsemen of criticism, defensiveness, stonewalling, and contempt. And then the last one is shame when that happens.
It's gone. Is it that one?
I don't know. I wouldn't try it.
You wouldn't?
I wouldn't.
Can you see that?
Yes.
Yes, we can.
All right. Well, let's see if we can get there. So you want to answer that question while I do this?
Which question?
Just the one about the therapy, because
Oh.
all of these, well, all of these can be used to sabotage, right? You could easily look at, I could have easily looked at him and go, oh yeah, right. You're going to go to your therapist and talk about it. How about you talk about it right now and get honest with me? I mean, we can always derail any of these steps. And so I think, to answer your question, you know, how much trust has been broken, and if there's so much trust that's been broken, to go into some other solution, which might be, why don't you come to therapy with me?
And I may have misread the question. I thought it was more directed at, is there a vulnerability that my wife assumes by me talking about the event in therapy, and if she's uncomfortable with that. But what I'd offer about that, and I'm not sure which way the question was phrased, but if that's the issue, what I would offer is that, you know, I'm not in therapy to talk about my wife. And by the way, if you have a therapist that allows you to talk unceasingly about your spouse, you need to find a new therapist.
Yeah.
I'm being a little playful, but you know, I'm in there to get my money's worth, not talk about what's going on with my wife when I'm in talking about therapy and that. And that's a little bit blunt, but that's, you know, that's the reassurance that, you know, now if it's marriage therapy, I agree that may be a different thing. Generally, there's some rules that we can get to with our spouse about when we're going to talk about stuff that's going to be brought up in therapy, whether we bring it up first time in therapy or if we talk about it first until we hit a stalemate and then we take it to therapy. That's the agreement for many couples.
So let me speak to that. That was my question. And it was more like exactly what you're saying. I definitely focused on the client's situation and basically, how do I put this? So basically we did deal with her issues. So then when she was able to talk to him, it became a 15 to 30 minute conversation versus it being a 3-day fight.
Sure.
And so she basically said, okay, I won't do that in the future. I will talk to you first, but this is what you gained by me discussing this topic with her. But when we discussed it, you weren't bashed. It was about me and my own childhood wounds. But I'm wondering if, like, and she knew not to do that again, but at that point he saw the value. And I'm guessing, of course, your wife saw the value at that point in your relationship. But if you have someone like you said, like Dina said, that it's almost like that person is sabotaging the discussion. How do you work around getting the focus back off of that, I guess, is the question. Like when that person says, well, I don't want you to talk to the therapist, talk to me now. Do you try to do some of it if part of that is true, but and not a complete sabotage? Like,
yeah, I mean, I think a lot of times people get real eager to get to the answer and wade through this. And oftentimes, you know, the impatience is driven by a desire to feel better. I mean, it's the impatience is, I want to get this resolved now because I don't want to have to wait to figure this out. And listen, we can do that to the level we're capable. I mean, in our vignette, the way we
Yeah.
played it out here. You know, I went as far as I could in talking about the issue, and then as an offering to my wife in the vignette, the offering was, I still have work to do, and I'm committing that I'll continue to do the work, but I'm not sure I'm going to be able to get to the root of this. And that's where I'm committing to go take that part of it to therapy, to look at my motive and what's going on with me, that I'm trying to fill myself with this event that's going on external to me. And,
Okay.
you know, if it continues at that point, then you know, no, you're going to talk about it right now. We just entered the realm of badgering by the spouse.
Yeah.
And, you know, that's just going to invite the complete shutdown at that point.
And then when do you get to the point, like Dina had said something about, well, then you could say you can come with me, but I really tried to guard the sanctity or the privacy of the relationship that the client has with me without people coming into their sessions.
No.
So how do you, like, at what point would you really allow that as the therapist, that person comes into the therapy with you when it's not going to become a marriage therapy situation?
Yeah, I think that's a clinical call, Joyce. And that really is about our own training and philosophical view. I'm such a systems therapist that I will welcome that sort of thing, because I think when a spouse, a kid, a aunt, an uncle is threatened by the therapist, I invite them in so that they can see me, so they can hear. And usually I invite them in by saying something like, all I have is this one viewpoint, and I would really love to hear what it's like for you to live with this person. Can you give me, information that maybe she or he doesn't see? So that I do it in a really respectful way of again, just deepening that the trust between them, and using therapy to do that.
And do you do that initially? Like, I have some clients I would feel more comfortable doing that with, and I have done it. And the client I'm speaking of, she could handle that really well and still guard that situation. But how do you judge that? Where I've had other situations where it's that person wanting to manipulate the therapy or still control the client. And I am really trying with the client to say, this is your time to build your boundaries.
Sure. No, and I honor that. I think that's again, to Dina's point, I think that's a clinical judgment call. But generally as therapists, we can usually, not always, but we can usually pick up when that manipulation is started, and we can get a sense of that by the dynamics of the situation. And one of the real effective things that Dina and I do is we do a lot of conjoint therapy, where I'm working with one partner and Dina's working with the other, and we get all four of us in the same room. That will cut through that completely. And so then the next question is for the spouse that wants to intrude on the session is the next response I expect to usually get is, well, I don't have a therapist. And that's the invitation at that point to say, well, this is one model we use. I'd be happy to refer you to somebody that I think would work well with you in this family system. And then the four of us can get together to begin talking about this, or send them directly on to marriage therapy. Because you're right, you've got to maintain, for somebody that's less empowered in that system, you've got to maintain their freedom to come to therapy for their safe place. You cannot jeopardize that. So I agree with you completely on that.
Yeah, I agree.
And there was one client where I just did not feel comfortable with it, but it just they just wouldn't stop. So I finally did. And it was very interesting for the client to watch me have boundaries with that other person.
Yeah, that's just what I was going to say. I mean, you're modeling that. And that's really what we were trying to do today for all of you, is just give you some modeling of what this could look like. And ask you all to just take the risk of stepping into it. It's a very humbling process on both parts, because so many of us regress into the child that says, you're wrong, you make it right, you owe me, and go into that very old model that children operate in. So any other questions before we stop?
Very valuable. Thank you so much. I like the modeling.
Any other questions? We are about to end.
Well, again, we want to thank Unity Church for co-hosting this with us. Again, watch the email reminder to see about the opportunity of when we step back into live presentation, and info at D2 Counseling if you'd like a copy of the PowerPoint or to get a CEU certificate for attendance tonight. And then reminder once more, June 15th is Shannon Pertel talking about self-compassion and recovering from narcissistic abuse. So I will mention that we have several openings in various groups that we have. If you have an interest in group therapy and are looking for a group, we've got several with different issues. Shoot us an email and we'll be happy to tell you what openings we have or help you find a group with us or someplace else as well. But we want to thank you all for attending tonight and wish you well.
Yeah, thank you so much. And thank you for your patience with our technology.
Thank you, guys.
Be well.